So today's session, as you can probably tell by the title, is really focused on score reports. And like I said, it is really going to be focused on those testlet score reports, how to access them, how to understand and navigate and interpret those to really help support that instructional side of things. We're going to be talking a lot about setting goals for the future based on the most recent score report. So as we get those score reports throughout the year, how do we set goals for ourselves and then also set goals for our students and help support those data chats? So we're able to have those conversations with our students as well, because based on our data, we know the students really want to see how they're doing. And then really at the end of the day, use MAST data to drive the instructional side of things. That's the whole reason at the end of the day why we went to this assessment model, is to not only get the summative determinations that we have to have for the state and the federal regulations, but also to have additional information that we can help support our students and give our teachers additional information throughout the year. Score reports, those are all hyperlinked for you. So if there's any additional resources that you need to come back to, that's a great page to start with. It also has our contact information for the assessment help desk if you have any additional questions. Also, it has a link to our upcoming professional learning opportunities. All right, with that, we're just going to go ahead and jump in to just talk about the big picture view of MAST. So when we're looking at the system of assessing and getting our score reports back and what that looks like throughout the window, this is really the graphic that we have tried to share with the field to show a way that we can do this in a way that we are best able to utilize that information to drive the instruction. So as we all know, the school year started for a lot of us few months ago, and we did a lot of out of window instruction. So you may have completed a math unit, a few ELA units, and then that window opened. We've already seen a ton of testing happen throughout the state within the first few weeks, which is really great to see. So we know that a lot of our schools have already tested right away, which is exactly the intent of MAST, to as soon as your students are ready to assess, you go ahead assess, because the sooner you can assess, the sooner you can get that data back. So we get that data back, and that's why we're here, is to really talk about, well, what do we do with it next? So throughout that cycle, we can get that data back, we can continue to instruct, and then we can assess again. So this is really the cycle that we hope that our schools are using throughout each one of our windows. I'm sure, as many of you know, the windows expanded to 8 weeks this year to be able to allow for this cycle to happen a little bit more naturally, not being able to have to squeeze our windows or squeeze our testing into shorter periods of time. So as we talk about data use and being able to use those score reports, it's really with the intent to be able to use those testlet reports just one at a time to be able to get that data back, go ahead and leverage that data, make those instructional changes, and then go ahead and assess on the next content when your students are ready. So there's a lot of tasks that have to occur for MAST to get to the point where we get those score reports back. And so first, we're just going to focus on how do we find those score reports in the first place? Because if we can't find those score reports, we obviously can't use them. So first thing, we just want to remind everyone, one of the biggest questions that we get in within the assessment team is can't get into our Kite Educator portal account. So just a reminder, whenever you are trying to get into the Kite Educator portal, which is where we do all of our Kite administration, where our score reports are located, make sure that you are accessing through the Montana specific URL. You can always find it through the MAST portal webpage. So go ahead, make sure that you are accessing through there. If for any reason you are trying to get into Kite and it is not letting you, I just always go back to that first MAST portal page and make sure that I'm accessing through that URL. That's the biggest reason why we can't get into the Kite Educator portal. So just an overview of the reports that are available. I'm sure many of us are familiar so far with our testlet reports. Those are reports that were available throughout the school year last year. They'll be available throughout the school year this year. Student testlet reports are going to be very similar to what you experienced last year. So those are the reports that are based on each individual testlet that your student takes. Those are available weekly, the Thursday after your student tests. So if you tested at any time this week, you're going to get that delivery the following Thursday. If you tested last week, you're going to get your reports tomorrow, which is really exciting. Those are also shared in the Kite Parent portal, for any parents that are connected. So if your school or district is using the Kite parent portal, those score reports are automatically delivered on those Thursdays when those score reports are released. Only caveat to that is our performance tasks. Since those are hand scored and those are administered in window 2, we let the window wrap up. Those are hand scored. It takes a little bit of time. So those are delivered 2 weeks after the end of window 2. Classroom reports, very similar to what we had last year as well. Those are delivered on that weekly basis. But this year we have Excel files for those. So now we're not only able to download those PDFs, but we also have Excel files, which is really exciting. So you can go in now if you tested at any time up until this point in the window, and you can go ahead and you can download those. So a different view of that data. We also have school and district testlet reports. Last year, those were not released until the end of our final window. This year, we are releasing those at the end of every window. So at the school level and then at the district window, you'll be able to see those PDF and those Excel files at the end of each window. So you're not waiting till the end of the year. The next report we're going to talk about is the through-year report. That report was our report that we just released on October 16th. That is the culmination of all of the testing that happened last year. So we took all of the testing that a student did throughout the year in math and ELA. We took that through the standard setting process, and through that we established those achievement levels. So after that process, we were able to establish those achievement levels. Each student was assigned that achievement level, and those are now available in the Kite Educator portal as well. So those are the results that are assigned to each school and each district, and we are getting ready for state data release here in the next few weeks as well. So those are available on October 16th. So if you haven't checked those out in the Kite Educator portal, you can go ahead and do that. Next year, they will be available much sooner. We just had to go through the standard setting process this year. One report that is new for this upcoming year that we'll take a look at is the progress report. So what the progress report is it takes testing that students have done up until, or at the end of each window, so at the end of window 1 and the end of window 2, and based on how students performed, it is giving an estimation of where their achievement is at the end of each one of those windows. So 2 of those reports, and then we have that final report, which will be that through-year report of what that final achievement is. Once again, just like all of our other reports, those are at the student, the classroom, the school, and the district level, and we'll take a peek at those in just a few minutes. Just a reminder on where to access those score reports. Within the Kite Educator portal, our score reports are all found under interim, and then you go to our view results. One thing that you just have to keep in mind is under testlet reports, that little triangle dropdown is where you can get all the different types of reports. So classroom report will give you the report for just the classroom level. Your student reports will give you all the reports that for your role that you have students that are available to you, and so on and so forth for that district report and that school report. So if you want to see different levels of report, you have to use that drop down. You can also go to that common bundled report to bundle those reports together. So if you want to print out your whole class of student testlet reports, you can go ahead and you can bundle those together. I can go ahead and I can create the reports. Of course, also the great thing about these is you can select, you can do this bundling for both the testlet and the through-year reports. So if you're getting ready to send out your through-year reports, you can create all of those reports, print them out at the same time, and go ahead and get those ready. So while I'm in here, I'll also show you under the reports and those classroom reports as well. And the same thing within those common bundled reports, you can also bundle your through-year reports as well. One thing to keep in mind when you are bundling and printing those through-year reports, each one of our through-year reports are 2 pages long, so they're front and back for both math and ELA. So easy thing to do there when you are printing is just to double-side print those. All right, so we're just going to take a quick peek at these through-year reports. We're not going to dig too much in them today. There are a lot of resources on the through-year reports. But this is, like I said, a combination of all of the information from the testing that the students have done from the last year. So you'll see at the bottom, it has it's almost like a report card, a review of all of the testlet performance from your students. This is a math through your report. So it has a performance for all of those 12 testlets, and it also has which standards were assessed on each one of those. So you can not only see where your students were a little stronger or where they need a little extra help in each one of those standards. It also has that overall achievement level, so that scale score, so you can see where in the achievement level they are. And then it has also that scale to show overall where in each one of those bands your student is. It also has a little bit of text as well to help both our educators and our parents who are receiving these reports understand what that achievement level means. These aggregate up to the classroom level, so you can go ahead and you can see these for your rosters that you had for last year, each one of those performance levels. These also have the average scale score for the classroom, so the average for all the students that were rostered, and then it does give some comparative data for the state scale score, the district, and then the school. One thing I do want to note is that these are our unofficial results, and so these are based on all the students that tested last year. When we get to our statewide data release, you could see some discrepancies just based on which students were actually eligible for reporting. And then similarly, this is the ELA through your report. The only addition to that is we also have subscores for literary and informational. So you can see relative how your students did or that student did in each one of those areas. So we are going to move in, like I said, focus on those test reports for the majority of this time. One thing that we thought was really interesting as we were getting some student survey data last year is that overwhelmingly our students were really looking forward to and wanted to know how they were doing on their testlets. And so we just thought that this was absolutely fascinating that 82% of our students wanted to know how they were doing on their testlets. Some of them wanted to see how they could improve, and some of them were just really curious. And so we're really focusing on this upcoming year, ensuring that our students are knowing how they're doing, and then also moving into that next step of using it for those instructional purposes, and then also being able to set some goals and talk through that data with our students. Just some general guidelines about our testlet score reports and really any sort of assessment data that we receive. It's providing a snapshot of our student on a very focused set of standards. The great thing about MAST is our testlets are short, but keep in mind that we are assessing a very small chunk of information on one day for our students. So keep that in mind. It's really helped to support professional judgment, not replacement. So if you see that, a student performs drastically different from what you're seeing in the classroom, keep that in mind and the general knowledge about what you have in that student and what they can do. Items do vary in complexity and should not be averaged to determine a single score. So each one of our items are not created equal. So you have some more difficult items, some easier items. So especially when we start looking at the levels, different items are going to relate to different levels of proficiency. So just keep that in mind, that missing one item on one testlet and a student missing a different item, those students aren't necessarily performing at the same level. And just consider those alongside all the other data that you're receiving as an educator. As we go into the 25-26 school year, we are really excited to be able to move from performance bands, which were norm reference last year, since we didn't have our proficiency level set, to criterion reference. And so last year, since we didn't go through that standard setting process where we defined proficiency for each one of our grades and our subject areas, we were basing those bands off of how students performed on a similar testlet. So we were really basing it off of pilot or expanded pilot the year before. So students in level 1 were performing comparatively to students who performed in the lowest third. Band 2 was in the middle third. Band 3 was in the highest third. Now that we have those proficiencies established, we are able to relate those levels closer to proficiency. So you will notice that level 1 and level 2, those are relating to students who are, that performance is relating to students who are not quite performing at that overall proficiency level. So level 3, if you see your students in level 3, they are performing in that level that is relating more to that overall proficiency. Do keep in mind that we did not establish proficiency for each individual testlet, so it is relating to overall proficiency for the entire school year. When we look at the progress reports, it is kind of nice that you can see based on the entire testing that they've done up to that point where they would be established. But that is a big move. So you might see students performing a little bit differently in their levels than they did on their bands last year. So looking specifically at a math testlet, what you'll see this year is you have that level. So how that performance aligns with overall performance, not specifically relates to those standards that are being assessed. We do have some additional text in there that's explaining what the testlet was measuring, how it relates to other content that the student might have seen the year before or the year after. And then also it's going to describe what that performance means. And just reminders, use it in conjunction with all the other information that you are gathering from your student. The great thing about math testlets, which I wish I had when I was a math teacher, is that misconception data. So math testlets are able to provide, based on how students' response patterns are, is misconceptions that they have demonstrated throughout the testlet. So for this student, they were demonstrating that they are incorrectly using subtraction to evaluate an equation. So for some of your students, they might have multiple misconceptions per testlet. Some of them might not have any, depending on how they answer. That's one of those key components of math testlets that really make MAST a little bit different than our assessments that we've had in the past. We also have that testlet summary. So it's going to show each standard that was assessed on that testlet and then the points earned compared to the points possible. So some of our testlets have one standard, some have multiple. So it just depends on how many standards are assessing, what that points earned and that points possible is looking like. And then continuing down that math testlet report, we also have those question descriptions and how students performed on each one of those items, and then also the standard that is aligned to it. So for MAST, since it is our statewide assessment, we're not able to release those items, but we are able to share with you a little bit about what that item was actually assessing. So you can go and you can say, all right, this student is struggling with these concepts. So you can take that information forward with you to make some of those instructional decisions. So all of that information on those testlets aggregate up at the classroom level. Just a reminder, those classlet testlet reports are based off of the rostering. So if you, as a middle school, you decided to roster all of your sixth graders onto one roster, you would get a classroom report that has all of your sixth graders on it. If you want to break those down into smaller groups, that's what those classroom reports would be on. But you'll be able to see overall testlet performance and those levels, your average percent of points for each one of the standards that were assessed. And then you also get to see the misconceptions and the frequency of misconceptions. So I think how powerful to be able to see a misconception that's popping up one time in a group of 14 in comparison to, a misconception that's popping up in half of your students or over half of your students. And then it's also going to give you a breakdown of each one of your students that tested, their performance level, and then their individual misconceptions that they demonstrated. On the ELA side, same thing, it's going to give you that level. We don't have misconceptions for ELAs. And since ELA is assessing a larger group of standard, we put those standards into clusters. I think Tressa can drop a document that provides a little bit more information about which standards create those clusters. But those clusters are the things that we are reporting on because, like I said, there's a lot of more standards that are assessed on our ELA testlets than are assessed on our math testlets. So you'll get a breakdown of your points earned versus your points possible for each one of those clusters. And then also that item breakdown as well, the description, the credit earned, and the standards. One thing to keep on ELA, or keep in mind for your ELA, for your item breakdown, we do have ELA items that are worth multiple points. So on math, each one of those items are going to be a correct or an incorrect. For our ELA items, you will see some partially correct on there. And then once again, just like our math testlets, those aggregate up to the classroom level, the aggregation of our clusters, those levels, and then a breakdown of how each one of the students in that roster performed. And then great thing this year is those school reports are now available at the end of each one of our windows. So we'll be able to see that math report. So if you have multiple classrooms that are testing on the same testlet, you'll be able to see all of those that classroom information aggregated up. And then also for that district as well. So if you are in a larger district and have multiple schools, you can see how those schools are performing. And you can also see a breakdown of each individual school. Same thing on those school reports, you can see the breakdown of each individual classroom. And there's just the district report for the ELA side of things. So progress reports, which are probably going to be very new because we have not been able to release these yet. These will be released at the end of window 1 and the end of window 2. So this is really trying to provide an estimation of, based on what students have done so far in the year, where their achievement would be if we calculated it based on what they have taken. So for this student, you will see the achievement range. So breaking it into those 4 achievement levels that we see on our 3-year reports. And then it has a range of where we think that student would be on their achievement level. You will notice for that window 1, this would be like our first stage progress report. It is very wide because we are trying to make a pretty big or pretty broad estimation based on very few testlets. So this will show you that estimated achievement. It'll give you a description of it, and then it'll show you their progress, how many testlets they've taken, and then when that progress report was generated by. It'll also show that testlet performance for everything that they've taken. If you are mailing home your testlet reports, or if you are just providing them in the mail rather than the parent portal, you can mail these in lieu of mailing each one of your testlet reports, since this will provide each one of your testlet or performance on each one of those testlets. So as we move into window 2, this would be the estimate. So you will see that estimation becomes a little bit smaller because we're a little bit more confident because that student has taken more testlets. It's going to show in that progress any changes. So not only has our estimation gotten a little bit smaller, but you'll notice that that bottom end has moved up a little bit. And then it's going to show all those additional testlets that that student has taken. So these will be generated, like I said, 2 times a year progress report after window 1, after window 2, and then after window 3, our progress report becomes our 3-year report. One thing to just keep in mind, anytime that we're getting either a 3-year report or a progress report or a testlet report, is just to take a few moments to reflect on it before we go to any other steps. So just a few questions to ask yourself before we mail these to families or start talking about them to students or start to make any sort of instructional decisions, is just asking yourself, are these consistent with expectations? What misunderstandings are revealed? Are there any gaps in instructions that contribute to misunderstandings? And what can I do to help my student master the standard? I know that when I was a teacher, I would get data back and I would want to do something with it right away. And I think sometimes as educators, I think that's it. Like, just our automatic intention is like, we want to fix something that's not working well. So I think it's just really important to keep in mind as we get these score reports back, to take a little time to reflect, especially at the teacher level, to think about what could have contributed to these results before we start moving on to those next steps. If you want to approach any one of these questions, so how might you use MAST data to adjust or improve your teaching strategies? Or if you're not in the classroom, how will it help support the role that you're currently in? How could this data influence curriculum planning or pacing? What is one actionable step that can be taken from a testlet score report? Or just one piece of information that you can take back and share with your team? So we'll move in a little bit more on what we do after we get that information, how we talk with students, and how do we help set our goals with our students and with ourselves as well. So just something to reflect on as we go through this is how do we talk to students about the results and support them in setting goals? I think that with our former summative assessment, this was something that was just really challenging to do, is to take that information and to talk to students about it and set those goals because it was so far removed. But now that we have that data more frequently, we know that our students want that information, and they're able to make that connection of, I just tested on this, or I just learned this, I just tested on this. What did I do? I think that those discussions come a lot more natural. So we're going to talk about some of those frameworks that we can use for that, and then why it is so important to set some of those goals. So if this is our instructional site, or this is our cycle of instruction and testing and getting those score reports back, I just want you to reflect on where in those points are going to be good places to set goals with students and talk with our students about that data. So goal setting, we know that it matters, especially when it's done with our students. It's a really powerful practice, and it's going to help improve our learning outcomes. And it's really important that also that we're analyzing that data together. And we're going to talk about some of the different ways that we can do that. Whether you have, individual time with students, or we just have whole group time with our students, what are some ways that we're able to talk about data together, be able to set those goals, and really have clarity about what success is, especially for each individual student. And MAST really helps support that because it does give that individual data multiple times throughout the year. And the research behind our goal setting does show that goal setting and self-assessment do have a positive impact. It has an effect size of 0.68, which is over that 0.4 threshold. So it is shown to significantly accelerate achievement. So when students are understanding where they are in their learning, where they're going, and the steps that they'll take to get there, they're going to learn nearly twice as much in the same amount of time. So really important to have that goal setting practice set up going into that assessment cycle. So just some things to keep in mind as you go into that goal setting. Really encourage students to take ownership of their goals, that these goals are for our students, not necessarily for the educators. I think as educators, we want to sometimes set those goals for our students, but the more that they're able to take the ownership, the better off it's going to be. Set those with a positive tone, pausing to let them reflect, and helping them brainstorm ideas. So really be the facilitator of that goal setting. And really focus on each student's individual performance and goals, and avoid making those comparisons to peers. So for some of our educators that might have more one-on-one time, that you can pull those students individually, sit with that student with your testlet score report, some things that you can have really in-depth conversations about are, what are some areas that you can improve on? What are some areas that need more attention or focus? And what can you do differently? So really those open-ended questions that get that student start to think about where can they have that improvement, and really put that on them to own that. And then starting to make that plan moving forward. What are some specific and concrete actions that you can do? So starting to make that plan. And I think also branching it out into a wider conversation, not just about the specific assessment, but just how they're approaching learning in general. So how can they advocate for themselves? So how can your teacher, your peers, and other guide you towards your goals? So if you have that one-on-one opportunity to have those discussions, great to start having those framing conversations. Now, while I know we would all love to have 5-minute one-on-one conversations with all of our students around every testlet, might not be the most feasible. So you could still facilitate this in a whole group discussion. So to prepare for that, you would have a demo score report. We have those within the interpretive guides. So have that ready to explain, walk through, hey, this is what each one of those score reports mean. Your students could each have theirs printed on their desk, but you really facilitate and help them walk through what each one of those components mean. Have those ready for their students, and then explain that the student should focus on their own data and not share data with their own classmates. I think as a former 6th grade teacher, I know as soon as we handed out any sort of metric, the comparisons start, but really making that goal setting individual. And then use a reflection sheet, and we'll provide you with some examples of reflection sheets that you can use with students, but have them have that reflection time, write it down, make it tangible. What did you do well on this testlet? What would you like to improve? What can you keep doing? Or what can you change for next time? And how will you achieve your goal? So really creating that, facilitating that reflection on the student side to help them own their own data and also set those goals moving forward. And I think some things, even to facilitate is like, can be as simple as maybe we need to take some more time on this assessment. Maybe we need to focus in on like these few skills, but really making it individual to the student to help them figure out like what's going to be best for their path moving forward. And then in the chat, we're going to have a resource to use, which is a goal setting for teachers if you want to use at the teacher level, and also a goal setting sheet for students as well if you would like to use that. And just a high level overview of what that looks like. Really talks about that purpose, reflecting on that data. So what did that data mean? Choosing a focus area, so maybe a specific skill. I think it's really easy to see, like a level 1 or level 3 and be like, God, I don't even know where to start. So really digging into that score report, maybe focusing on a misconception, maybe focusing on a cluster, but really be really specific about what you want to focus on. And then those SMART goals, so the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So helping your students develop those and then tracking that progress. So even if it's something that we're not going to measure until the next testing window, what are some things that you can do in between to track to help with that? So maybe it's, a student was really struggling on one of the multiplication testlets. So what are some things that they can do in between to help support some of those skills? Then also take time to reflect and to celebrate. So as that next score report comes out and you see that growth, take time to be able to celebrate with that student. Really reflect on, did my plan work? Did it not work? What can we do moving forward? And then the last thing we'll just wrap up today is sharing data with families. So there's really two sides of why we want to share our information with families. First thing is just we want our families to be able to support what we're doing within the classroom. So by providing that information throughout the school year, it lets them know how their student is doing and also helps them understand the data, encourage them to talk with their student about their strengths and that area of growth. So the student's not just hearing it from the classroom side, but they're also being able to hear about those conversations from home as well. So there's quite a few ways that you're able to, or there's two different ways for you to share those score reports. Those testlet score reports or testlet level information does need to be shared throughout the year. One of the ways that you can do that is that hard copy deliver. So a lot of our smaller districts still like to print their copy or print their score reports, either send them home with their students or mail them home. Be able to talk about them at parent-teacher conferences. So absolutely okay to be able to bundle and print those. And it's like I said earlier, you can either do those individual testlet reports or you can provide those progress reports at the end of each window because it does show how students performed on each one of those testlets. If you set up the Kite parent portal, those are sent out automatically, which is really nice as those score reports are generated throughout the window. Tressa, if you want to drop the resource in the chat on how to set up that parent portal, we do make it easier with the extract from Infinite Campus. That connection does have to be reestablished each year. So if you set it up last year, just a reminder to set it up again this year to ensure that all of those parent emails are accurate and you can get those score reports out. And just a reminder, individual testlet reports should be shared with parents and guardians in a timely manner. But we are not able to share our through year reports or those summative reports through the parent portal because we need to ensure those are getting home to families, that those are in the hands of our parents, of our families. Those need to be hard copied, delivered either email, parent-teacher conference, in a method that they're going to get home, and also placed in permanent files. So while you're doing that bundling, go ahead and print 2 copies. One can go home, one can go in the cumulative file. And then just a little bit more information on that parent portal. Like I said, it's that automatic. We'll deliver those score reports throughout the window as they're generated. It makes sure that those score reports get out in a timely manner. It provides that snapshot. And then Tressa just did drop that MAST Parent one pager that helps you set that up. We do also have just some boilerplate text that you can provide out to your families on how to set that up, that it makes it nice and easy for them. And then just some additional ways for data chats with families. So as you're going into fall parent-teacher conferences, or if a parent comes in and wants to talk about testlet reports as they are getting them, just a few things to keep in mind or some ways to frame that conversation. Ensure the discussion is part of a broader discussion. So MAST Score Report is one way to help us understand your students' progress. I think it's really easy to focus in on just one data point, but make sure we're keeping it broad, that it is just one component, and a great opportunity to talk about how students are doing overall within a classroom. Have a copy of that score report as possible. We do have interpretive guides available that talk about each part of those testlet score reports. So if a parent's confused on any part of those, you can provide those interpretive guides and really keep the discussion grounded in the data. We're looking at the students' data. We're going to identify some next steps. And then that way you're able to come back and you're able to track it and make it really tangible. Emphasize the specifics of those reports, show areas that the student's mastering or struggling with. Like I said, really avoid trying to make those comparisons to those peers. Discuss goals for the student. Even better if those students have already established those goals themselves. And then suggest ways that the families could help at home. Maybe it's completing homework, asking help when needed, really supporting that growth mindset. And even better if you can have those conversations with those students there.